Terry, a question. Guess it. Who said, quote, President Obama's foreign policy is based on fantasy? Who do you think that was? Was it Sarah Palin or Mitt Romney? Or who do you think?
No, I think it was
the
board of the Washington Post. I'm on top
she's got
of it
the
today.
reader here. I'm trying to. Yeah, can you believe that it was the editorial board of the Washington Post? The United States is trying to figure out the next move in the Ukrainian crisis. And by the way, before we get any further, who was it who said that the winner of the Oscar was going to be 12 Years a Slave?
I believe it was Pat Robertson.
Yes! You're
I
right,
am
twice.
On it today.
You go to the head of the class. No question about it.
Yeah.
Gravity didn't show. I mean, Gravity, a lot of high-tech stuff, but...
Well, it won many, many awards of its own.
I had to ask my wife's permission if I could go. It was on a Saturday or sometime. I'd gone someplace else. And I said, would you mind if I go? I'm going to the movie tonight. And she didn't want to go. So there was one little art theater in town. Well, it didn't show.
Is that it? That's the only place
the
it showed.
Narrow. And I had to drive to the Narrow, but it was a fabulous movie.
It'll be back.
Well, I guess. Fabulous movie. So they won the Oscar. My congratulations to them.
Yes, indeed.
They didn't ask my opinion, but nevertheless, there it was. Well, the crisis in the Ukraine is simmering. Is war coming to Europe? It might. Secretary of State John Kerry is flying to Ukraine for meetings tomorrow.
Russian troops have moved into key positions in the Crimean region of Ukraine, and there are reports the soldiers have occupied airports and surrounded military bases. George Thomas brings us the story.
The area in southern Ukraine known as Crimea now belongs to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
What has already happened is a brazen act of aggression.
Within hours of the orders, Putin's forces invaded and took complete control of the Crimean airspace, airports, highways, ports, and regional government without a single shot fired yet.
We are on the brink of the disaster.
Crimea is of huge significance to Russia. The Russian Black Sea Naval Fleet is located here. But Putin's ambitions go beyond the Crimean Peninsula. His next target could be eastern Ukraine. Over the weekend, pro-Russian demonstrators took control of key government buildings in several regions, replacing European Union flags with Russian ones, and called for union with Moscow.
We want Russia to hand out Russian passports to citizens who want them.
Ukraine accuses Moscow of orchestrating the takeover to justify an even wider invasion. 45 million people live in Ukraine. Nearly 8 million of them are ethnic Russians. Putin claims the new Ukrainian government installed after the ouster of Viktor Yanukovych is fascist and will persecute ethnic Russians. Putin says it's his job to protect them.
We want to live in peace, but we need security from Russia.
The crisis is even dividing some families.
Putin is not going to leave us alone. My sisters in Russia are offended at me and are yelling at me not to speak ill of their president. But I say to them, then your president shouldn't touch us.
For many Russians, Ukraine is viewed as part of the motherland. So when thousands of Ukrainians took to the streets 103 days ago demanding closer ties to Europe and the West, Putin wasn't too happy about it. Russia hasn't recognized the new pro-Western government in Kiev, and most experts believe Moscow will try anything to make sure it fails. This weekend, Ukraine's new but unstable government put the country on a war footing, ordering up all military reservists to active duty. This as Russian troops urge Ukrainian soldiers to lay down their weapons and pledge allegiance to Russia.
You know, this takes you back in history to the beginning of World War II, when there was an area called Sudetenland, and Adolf Hitler said, well, they're ethnic Germans. They're part of Czechoslovakia, but the Sudetendeutsch are ours, and we demand that the oppression of our people be eliminated. And of course, that's when Neville Chamberlain permitted the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, had one of the most powerful armies in Europe, and that was disbanded. And of course, Hitler then not only rolled over Czechoslovakia, then turned and rolled over Poland. Where does Putin end? Where does his ambition end? He wants to return the glory of greater Russia. And it is obvious in the Crimea that's a huge naval base and it's strategically important to the Russians. But nevertheless, what provocation can it be? The Ukrainians have said we want a different president. The president we had is a crook. He's been stealing money. He's been looting the Treasury. The Treasury's bankrupt, and we want to change. Well, every nation has a privilege of selecting its own leaders. That's not a reason for war. Well, George Thomas has just returned from the Crimea. George, were you afraid that maybe you might be subject to some military action, or did you get out just in time?
Pat, thank you for having me on the show. Yes, we got out just in the nick of time, and I'm actually heading tomorrow morning to Kharkov, which is about 5 hours east of Kiev. It's in the eastern province, one of the key regions in the east. I decided not to go back to Crimea because I'm getting reports from my sources on the ground that the Russian troops are in addition to trying to keep everybody else from getting into the Crimean Peninsula, they are specifically targeting journalists, in some cases confiscating their gear, their helmets, their bulletproof vests. Clearly don't want to let the world know what is going on inside. But look, Russia is in complete control of the Crimean Peninsula. The 6,000 troops, in essence, waltzed right across the border and took over within the space of about 48 hours without one shot fired. It was so easy and lightning in.
George, it looks like the Ukrainians in an eastern part of the country really want alliance with Russia. How will the Ukrainians ever get those troops out of the Crimea?
Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult, Pat. I mean, here's the ground reality. Russia has 850,000 troops on its side of the border. Ukraine has about 130,000. Half of them are conscripts. In the Crimean Peninsula for the last 10, 15 years, there have been stationed between 15 to 20,000 Russian naval forces. They are there. There are several warships that are surrounding the Crimean Peninsula. There's absolutely no way that the Ukraine soldiers can go in. There are several military bases, incidentally, Pat, in the Crimean Peninsula that are surrounded at this very moment by Russian troops. As I mentioned in my piece, they're trying to encourage the Ukrainians to lay down their arms. And in some cases, at some military bases, they say, in exchange for laying down your arms, we will give you a beautiful minted Russian passport.
What can the U.S. do? Have you talked to anybody over there that has any solutions?
Look, John Kerry, U.S. Secretary John Kerry is flying in tomorrow on a surprise visit. Clearly, this is a playbook that Vladimir Putin has had organized for quite some time, way before the Sochi Olympic Games, I mean, this is something that he was planning well ahead of time. NATO, EU, the United States cannot do anything at the moment. I mean, the least they can do is try to shore up the economic foundation of this country. Remember, Pat, this is an interim government just elected last week, very, very unstable, very weak, and doesn't have the support in the eastern part of the country. You know, you saw those demonstrations, and that's why I'm heading there tomorrow. Thousands of pro-Russian demonstrators. They've gone into key government buildings and they've replaced the flags of the European Union with the Russian flag. I mean, there is the anger toward this interim government is very, very real. And while I was in Sevastopol late last week, the anti-American sentiment, as you can imagine, because this is a predominantly pro-Russian city, the anti-American sentiment is extremely high. They blame Russia for orchestrating the revolution in Kiev, and they say, listen, we don't trust this interim government. We feel like we're going to persecute ethnic Russians, and we welcome Russia to come and help us.
George, stay safe. Let us hear from you. We appreciate so much you being there on the ground. It's very important. But ladies and gentlemen, the foreign policy of our government, according to the Washington Post, is fantasy, and it is fantasy. They have no interim plan. And there was a debate, you know, in the last presidential election Mitt Romney said there's a danger that the Russians will invade the Ukraine. Sarah Palin, interestingly enough, said the same thing in a op-ed piece, that this was a serious danger, and lo and behold, the danger is taking place. Why did the Russians do it? Because we didn't act in Syria. We were so weak in Syria, and Putin said, I could go in there with impunity. But the Crimea was a place of brutal battle. You know, the Crimean War was a black eye to Great Britain, and that's where you had Florence Nightingale, that's where the charge of the Light Brigade and things like that. It's a brutal place, but it has been under Russian control. Well, we'll keep an eye on it, but keep in mind, like it or not, Russia has a huge arsenal of nuclear weapons. We talk about Iran and we talk about North Korea, but they can't hold a candle to what Russia's got. And we were hoping that we could have a reset of relations with Russia and we could be living at peace and friendship. But Vladimir Putin is a KGB operative, and he wants hegemony, and he wants power, and he wants money, and he looks like he's getting them all. And he recognizes in the United States we have weak leadership and a divided country, and he's going to do whatever he wants to now while the game is open. Well, back here at home, 100 million Americans are facing a massive mid-Atlantic winter storm today. It's already canceled 2,000 flights and prompted New Jersey to declare a state of emergency. We have two reports on that weather situation from CBN News, beginning with our reporter, Heather Sells.
The country's midsection has already taken a beating. On Sunday, freezing rain and heavy snow pelted many central and eastern states. Crews have struggled to de-ice plains and clear roads. In Oklahoma, ice caused a 40-car pileup.
I threw it in four-wheel drive, and even with four-wheel drive, I was spinning.
Forecasters say today's latest blast of winter will hit the mid-Atlantic with anywhere from 6 to 12 inches of snow. Cities have tried to prepare. Baltimore brought in 20,000 tons of salt, and the power company warned customers to brace for outages.
We do have crews, an increased number of crews stationed throughout the entire service territory.
Thousands in Arkansas and Tennessee are already without power, and school children in multiple states from Texas to Pennsylvania will stay home today, all thanks to our latest winter weather.
This is Paul Strand in Washington. Officials have declared a state of emergency and federal offices are closed here in the nation's capital. But this time the government shutdown isn't the politicians' fault. Blame the second major snowstorm in a month. Overnight, a sort of icy sleet fell, and now 4 to 10 inches of snow are expected to seal that wet, heavy stuff to power lines and trees. Add in heavy winds, and that could lead to lots of accidents and power outages. Area airports have canceled some 300 flights, so if you are here, you're likely stuck here. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
It's amazing. The Republicans didn't have anything to do with shutting the government down. Yeah, how about that?
Shocker.
I think the Lord doesn't want that government open. Let's hope he's on our side.
And he's able.
Anyhow, we're in Virginia Beach. So far, the weather has been rather benign. It's about 37 degrees, and they think that the stuff is going to hit us this afternoon. So the schools are closed in most of the big areas around here, but the reason is that these drivers don't want to drive those school buses loaded with children in these slick conditions. It only takes about a half an inch of ice on the roads, and at that point, they are impassable. So rather than bring the children in and then run the risk of having accidents on the way home, they just close the schools. So the major school systems are shut in our area, and the school children are having a day off, but it's not the kind of thing where they can build up snowmen.
The Christian film Son of God had a strong box office opening this weekend, bringing in $26.5 million to finish a close second behind the airline thriller Nonstop. Analysts say with numbers like these, Hollywood is bound to make more religious-based films. CBN's India ministry received the 2014 National Religious Broadcasters Media Award for International Innovation. The award is presented to an organization outside the U.S. that excels in the innovative use of electronic media to proclaim the gospel. CBN's program Shamadan, which means Solutions, airs every Sunday morning on ETV Bengal, one of the most popular Bengali channels.
The people who call are from Muslim background, from Hindu background, and most of them are very, very religious about it. So it's not easy for us to evangelize them on a person-to-person basis, but Shamadan is an answer for reaching out to these people in this dark area.
The program addresses various issues through testimonies and ministry segments to reach millions of Bengali speakers in India and in Bangladesh. Well, you can find out more about what CBN is doing around the world by going to cbn.com/international.